Picture this. It's 1869. The American Civil War is over, the West is being settled, but there's still this giant black spot on the map of the United States, a place so intimidating, so mysterious, that people just called it the Great Unknown. This was the Grand Canyon. And today, we're going to follow the incredible, harrowing story of the very first American expedition to truly brave this chasm, a journey led by a one-armed Civil War veteran named John Wesley Powell.
So, before anyone really knew what was in there, this is what they believed. This wasn't just a place nobody had mapped, it was the stuff of nightmares. I mean, listen to that. The campfire stories, the rumors. They were about a river that literally swallowed people whole. A place with whirlpools that could crush a boat to splinters. And even crazier, stories of the river just disappearing into underground caves, taking everyone with it, never to be seen again. This was the psychological landscape Powell and his crew were paddling into. It wasn't just an unknown place. It was a place that was rumored to be actively, malevolently deadly.
All right, let's dive right in. Section 1. Into the Great Unknown. You have to remember, back in the 19th century, the Grand Canyon wasn't a national park with guardrails and gift shops. It was a complete and total void on the map, one of the last true mysteries left on the entire continent. And the sheer scale of this unknown region is it's mind-boggling. We're talking about an area of 300,000 square miles drained by the Colorado River and all its tributaries. That's bigger than the entire state of Texas. It's almost the size of France and Spain combined. It was almost entirely unmapped and unexplored by Americans. This wasn't just a canyon. It was a vast, hostile province of stone and water.
So, who in their right mind would look at that blank spot on the map, hear all those terrifying stories, and say, yeah, I'm gonna go take a look? Well, that brings us to our guy, Section 2, the one-armed major. This is where the story gets even more incredible, because the leader of this whole thing, John Wesley Powell, was a man defined by a pretty profound physical challenge and an even more profound sense of determination.
I mean, let that sink in for a second. The man who was about to lead a crew through what were probably the most dangerous rapids in North America was doing it with only one arm. He'd lost his right arm at the Battle of Shiloh in the Civil War. Can you even imagine? Every time he had to scramble over a rock, every time he had to steady himself in the boat, every single paddle stroke, he had to manage it all with that profound disability. It's just an unbelievable testament to his sheer force of will.
You can just feel the deep affection and respect in those words, can't you? This quote really gets to the heart of the expedition. Powell knew he couldn't do it alone. He later wrote that in every moment of danger, his safety was the first thing his men thought about. They were, for all intents and purposes, his missing right arm. This wasn't some formal scientific team. It was a band of brothers, forged in absolute hardship, all watching out for their maimed commander.
So who were these guys? Well, Powell put together a crew that was perfectly suited for the raw, physical challenge ahead. They were hunters, trappers, grizzled mountain men, and fellow Civil War vets. These were not academics. They were tough-as-nails individuals who were used to the wilderness, used to being hungry, cold, and miserable. They were ready for the adventure, but as we'll see, the psychological beating the canyon would dish out was going to test every single one of them to their absolute breaking point.
All right, so the team is assembled. They've pushed their wooden boats into the Green River, which flows into the Colorado. And right away, they meet their primary, relentless enemy, the river itself. Section 3, Gauntlet of the Colorado. Now, Powell wasn't just a daredevil. He was a scientist, a keen observer. And he was the first person to really describe some of the terrifying physics of these rapids. One of the most dangerous things he documented was what he called a standing wave. Now, this is different from a wave in the ocean that moves. Imagine a wave that just stays in one place while the entire force of the river rushes through it. Hitting one of these wasn't like riding a swell, it was like being dropped into a hydraulic monster, a liquid trap that could hold a boat, fill it with water, and just tear it to pieces. Okay, let's just try to put ourselves in one of those little wooden boats for a second. The water ahead of you suddenly drops 10 or 20 feet off a ledge. At the bottom, it explodes upwards into this massive wave, which is then followed by a whole train of smaller but incredibly violent waves called billows. The boat is bucking and plunging. You're being thrown into pure chaos, desperately trying to bail out water and steer with these giant, clumsy oars, just trying to keep from being swamped, or even worse, smashed into a granite wall. Now imagine that. For 3 straight months, day after day after day. And while all this is happening, the walls of the canyon are just getting higher and higher and higher. The average cliffs were already a staggering 1,200 feet tall. But as they got deeper, they ran into these sheer faces like Dunn's Cliff, soaring 2,700 feet straight up from the river's edge. That's nearly 2 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other. The sky became just a tiny little ribbon, way, way up above. There was no climbing out, there was no escape. It created this profound, suffocating sense of claustrophobia. They were trapped at the bottom of the earth, with only one way out, forward, through whatever horror the river was going to throw at them next.
You can only push people so far. Months of nonstop danger, your supplies running out, the psychological pressure just building and building. Eventually, something has to give. And for Powell's expedition, this was the moment it all came crashing down. Section 4, a fateful decision.
So it's late August. They've been on the river for over 2 months, taking this constant physical and mental beating. Their food is almost gone, and what's left is spoiled. The canvas they use for shelter is rotting, they have almost no blankets left, their clothes are literally in tatters. And right at this absolute low point, they round a bend and come face to face with what looks like the worst rapid yet. Just a roaring, granite-choked monster that seems completely impossible to run. And for 3 of the men, that was it. That was the final straw. They argued that trying to run that rapid was just suicide.
And this led to the ultimate, desperate dilemma. Which is the safer path? Do you trust the violent, raging river that has tried to kill you every single day for 2 months, or do you attempt to climb thousands of feet up these sheer, unexplored cliffs into a desert wilderness you know absolutely nothing about? It's an impossible choice. Powell, ever the optimist, argued for the river. He was convinced the end was near. The others argued for the cliffs. It was a life-or-death gamble, and they were betting in opposite directions.
In the end, the crew fractured. The argument couldn't be won. 3 men, Ormo Holland, his brother Seneca, and William Dunn, they just couldn't be persuaded. You have to imagine this scene. They said their goodbyes. Powell, heartbroken, gave them 2 rifles and a share of what little food was left. And then he and his remaining men just watched as the 3 began their desperate, impossible-looking climb up the canyon wall, completely convinced they'd just chosen the only path to survival.
And this is where the story turns from a high-stakes adventure into a gut-wrenching tragedy. The outcome was something that absolutely no one could have possibly imagined. Section 5, the price of discovery.
The 2 groups faced these tragically different fates. Powell and his remaining crew took a deep breath, plunged their boats into that monster rapid, and they made it through. In a twist of incredible irony, that terrifying rapid was one of the very last major obstacles. Just 2 days later, they emerged from the end of the Grand Canyon, battered, starved, but alive. Meanwhile, the Dunn party achieved their own impossible feat. They actually made it. They climbed out of the Grand Canyon and reached the plateau above. They must have felt this incredible rush of relief. They thought they were safe. They were so wrong.
A year later, Paul came back to the area to continue his scientific work, and he met with the local Shivwits tribe, desperate to learn what had happened to the men he'd left behind. And it's then that he finally found out. Imagine sitting across from the chief, and through an interpreter, hearing this absolutely devastating confession. The chief admitted they had killed 3 white men, explaining that they had been terribly deceived.
Here's the awful, tragic misunderstanding. Right after the 3 men managed to climb out onto the plateau, they encountered the Shivwits. But shortly after, another Native American man arrived and told the tribe a terrible lie. He claimed that a group of miners in the area had assaulted a woman from a neighboring tribe, and that these 3 strangers were obviously those miners trying to escape. He insisted no one could possibly come down the canyon, so these men must be lying. Worked into a fury by this lie, the Shivwits warriors hunted the 3 explorers down and killed them. The men who chose the safe path, they survived the canyon only to die because of a vicious rumor.
And for Powell, there was one last surreal twist waiting for him. When he and his 5 surviving men finally stumbled into a Mormon settlement, they were treated like ghosts. News had traveled fast across the country, or, well, false news. The entire expedition had been reported as lost, presumed dead, swallowed by the great unknown. Powell later wrote, with a bit of dark humor, that a friend had actually collected all of his flattering obituaries for him to read. He hadn't just conquered the Grand Canyon, he had literally come back from the dead.
So Powell's incredible journey completely erased that great unknown from the American map. But it leaves us with this incredible question. His decision to push on through that last rapid, it seemed like madness to half his crew, yet it was the path to survival. Was it courage, or was it just blind, dumb luck?
The price of filling in that blank space on the map was measured in unimaginable hardship, in broken friendships, and ultimately in human lives. And it's a powerful reminder of the true, often brutal cost of exploration.